This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite's PL Premium Max. Say no to outdated and rundown. Say yes to projects that last with Loctite's PL Premium Max construction adhesive. Indoor or out, PL Premium Max is our toughest construction adhesive. It can be applied in all weather conditions and bonds to any common building material. Whether you're framing a custom home, upgrading to granite counters, or fixing up your latest flea market find, PL Premium Max is the right adhesive for the job. Say yes to a second chance. Say yes to Loctite. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information. Hey, podcast listeners, be sure to check out Fine Homebuilding's e-learning opportunities. We've created a special discount coupon just for you. Learn about sustainable home building, using mini-split heat pumps, insulation, finished carpentry, and more. See all of what's available at courses.finehomebuilding.com and then use the special code podcast20 for a discount on any class. That's podcast20 in all caps. Thanks for listening.
It's a real bummer to have the rainiest day of the year on the first day that my PV system is working. It was really anticlimactic to turn the switch, to turn the shut off on.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Production Manager for TDS Customs Construction and Fine Homebuilding Contributing Editor Ian Schwant.
Hello, everybody.
Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Ponzalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is great to see you guys this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my God, you guys were talking ahead of the show. Ian, I guess you have a new house under construction, and there's some other stuff you wanted to talk about, but I'd like to hear about this house that you and Brian were talking about before the show.
Yeah, so it's I guess it's a pretty good house that we're building for a client of ours just outside of Madison. It's got a lot of passive house qualities to it, since Christy Weber, our Director of Design and Architect for the project, is a certified passive house designer and consultant. But Brian had spoken to her on the phone and was trying to figure out some content for the magazine. And I was letting Brian know that we're planning on having an open house at the project, probably in mid-November, when we have all the windows in. The walls will be dense packed and have their Intello air barriers done. And then hopefully we'll have most of the mechanicals complete so that you can see everything going on behind what's going to get drywalled in. And maybe we'll do a blower door demonstration too at that time. Haven't quite gotten that far, but wanted to throw it out there to the listeners that if you're in the Madison area, we're going to be doing that in mid-November, and you can email the podcast and they'll direct you to me for more details.
Can I ask, what's the rationale for having an open house as a construction company?
I think it would just be a great opportunity to show off what is different about one of those constructed houses, passive house or pretty good house. I think on the surface, they end up kind of looking the same to most people. And I think it would be really a good opportunity for people to see what goes on behind the walls and why they're different and why you should consider some of those building practices over industry standards.
And how do you get the word out to folks like you just described who may be unfamiliar or even uninterested with construction to come out and see a construction project?
So I think we'll have to advertise it, obviously, through the podcast here, but also on our social media channels. And then we have an outside marketing firm that helps us with our company marketing. So I'm fingers crossed that they'll have some great ideas for how to get the word out.
That's cool.
It's such a common question from builders and architects who want to be able to do better work, but can't necessarily get clients to go for things that are, I don't know, maybe it's really just things that cost more, but also just things that are different. And as you were talking, I thought, so maybe I'm giving you an idea, but I thought it'd be interesting if you had some mock-ups of more common assemblies on site. Maybe you're already planning on
That's a good
doing
idea.
that. Yeah, so that they could see like, okay, this is how like most of the houses in the area are built. Most average houses around the country are built, and this is why this is different and why it works.
Can I
Yeah,
offer,
that's a
Brian,
great
you
idea.
think like a Fine Homebuilding editor, right? You're like,
Do you want to fly out for the open house and you can man the
I would love
mock-up
to.
of the typical wall?
Yes.
before we get to you, Brian, I can't wait to hear about Jeff's new water heater. I saw photos of that. I guess it was this morning you sent those, Jeff. How'd that
Yes,
go?
it went reasonably well. I mean, it took most of the day yesterday, but it's installed, and I had a hot shower this morning, so that was good.
Is it noisy? Is it quiet? Was it hard to hook up? I have so many questions.
It wasn't hard to hook up. It kind of sounds like a refrigerator running or something like that. Nothing too noisy. But yeah, I think getting the old one out was probably more problematic than getting the new one in.
Because it had like hundreds of pounds of sediment in the bottom, right?
Yeah, well, that and yeah, just disconnecting it and figuring out where the plumbing was all different, because it was the old one, just two pipes coming down from the ceiling going straight into the top of the tank. This one, they're coming in the side.
It looked like you lengthened your existing piping with what I think were shark bite kind of flexible connectors. Why choose those?
Well, they actually recommend having a flexible connection for some reason. I don't really know why.
Maybe noise?
Maybe, yeah, it may be that, or just a little bit of vibration from the motor running or something like that. I don't know what the rationale is, so I just included those. So.
They look expensive, those pieces of pipe.
Yeah, those were like, I don't know, $18 a piece, I think, something like that. So.
Well, cool. You'll have to keep us posted if it's keeping your basement drier and if it's keeping up with your hot water needs. I'm curious for myself.
Yeah, so am I.
It's also enormous. It seems like it's 6 foot tall?
Yeah, it's 6'2".
Jeez.
Yeah, well, that was the one, because it's heat pump only, so there's no electric resistance, boost. So I went with the biggest one I could get. So it's an 80-gallon.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. You were nodding, Ian, about the flexible connections to the water heater. Is that something your company does or have heard? Have you heard this?
It's something that I've heard, that it reduces the noise, but I was just waiting for you to make a comment about how expensive they probably were.
For those of you who are familiar with like race cars, it looks like the stainless steel braided hoses that they use on race cars for gas lines and radiators and that kind of stuff. Cool stuff. What have you been doing, Brian?
Well, I just got back yesterday from a few days down in Roanoke, Virginia. I was visiting the team at Better Building Works. It's a building science company in Roanoke. Monica Rokiki is the principal. She's a architect turned building scientist, and I was down there to observe a couple of energy audits. They do independent energy auditing. And by I've talked about this on the show before, but as what I mean by independent energy auditing is that they don't do any work and they don't sell anything. So the most that they're going to do after your energy audit is some project management. So what you really get is a thorough and unbiased report from them. They're not trying to sell you windows or new HVAC equipment. They generate a report that prioritizes future improvements to your house, starting with like health and safety issues, right? So anything that just is dangerous and needs to be fixed, and then going through the low hanging fruit of energy improvements, all the way up to sort of more significant things like new HVAC equipment or like new windows. And It was really interesting. I mean, I knew I've been on site for blower door tests. I knew approximately what an energy audit included and how the process would go. But there was just some sort of they were kind of forehead slappers, but they were also kind of eye-opening how helpful it is to have a professional come in and look at your house if you're a homeowner. Just for example, one of the first things that we did on each project was we just walked the exterior and observed and took photos. And one of the things they look for are any penetrations through the building assembly. It often like dryer vents, right? Or exhaust vents, things like that. And then when they go inside, they try to match those exterior penetrations to whatever is inside the house. And, one place we were at, we found a dryer exhausted through a pane of glass that was knocked out of a basement window. So it was this basement window with 3 panes of glass, and someone knocked out one of the panes and put a piece of wood in, cut a circle out of it, and invented the dryer exhaust through that, which is a little shoddy to begin with. But then we go inside and we go down to look at that penetration, and we see right away that the dryer exhaust is
unconnected,
terminates in the basement, nowhere near the vent, so it wasn't connected anyway. So what a simple thing for an unknowing homeowner: connect your dryer vent. Like, do that this weekend. Just connect your dryer vent and put some tape around it. So it's like really some things like that. And I just started to. It became really clear to me how, for a homeowner who knows nothing about houses, how helpful this could be. And also. I did see as we went through one of the houses that we worked on, the homeowners were there. And I did see their face sort of get more and more sullen as the process went on, and like just looking more and more distressed. And so I was chatting with her while the team from Better Building Works was getting I think they were getting the blower door set up, and she kind of had her hand on her head. And I said, I bet this seems like a lot, but don't forget that this is every house in the neighborhood. Like you're just learning about it. But all your neighbors have all these conditions, and things are okay. They also test indoor air quality while they're there, so you're going to find out if you have high levels of radon, high levels of carbon dioxide, like all those types of things are getting tested while they're on site. They have some pretty significant air quality testing stuff. So I thought it was awesome. I look forward to getting an article from them into the magazine sometime in the next few issues.
That's awesome, man. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Was it? Were they using thermography too, or because it's not really the right time of year to do that?
They were, and I think she said that that the industry standard is to have a 10-degree pressure, delta T between inside and outside to get quality thermal images. But she said with an experienced person using it, knowing what they're looking for, you're going to find what you're unless there's some big surprises, you're just going to find what you assumed. She also did thermal imaging with the blower door running, which was really instructive because you can see
the cold air paths, right?
Yeah, you can see the cold air paths. So I found that to be really kind of helpful. So they do pretty much everything. They often stay away from. They often bring in an HVAC tech to to check static pressure and airflow on return and supply side of the equipment because they don't like to mess with warranted equipment. Mm-hmm. She said they rarely do duct blasting because mostly they can tell whether the ducts need to be sealed through observation. And if they do the aeroseal process. So they're doing the duct blasting and checking the tightness while they're tightening the ducts. So she said they do it on occasion when they can't really observe the ducts well enough. But if they can see, she said it's pretty obvious usually how ducts have been installed and whether they're going to be leaky or not.
Man, I can't wait to see that feature in Fine Homebuilding because that is a fascinating subject, especially when the stuff is easy to fix. If we could teach people out in the general public how to fix their messed up houses pretty easily, that seems super useful.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you go into these old houses and there's so many things that There's so much insulation, for example, especially in attics. There's just so much insulation that's just not
Not doing anything.
doing anything. It's just
Yeah.
taking up space, and to be able to remedy those types of things, they're often not a big deal to
So
do.
I'm going to plug the after show before we get back to my favorite part of the show, which is our feedback. And Ian, you got to meet one of our fan favorite.
Super fan.
Yeah. So I just want to say our after show today is about developing contracts for construction projects. This was Ian's idea and expertise. So I look forward to talking to you about that, because an important subject to get stuff off the ground and keep it affordable, right? Or not.
Yep.
So tell us where you went, Ian.
So Superfan Dak is building a vacation cottage in Door County, which is known as Cape Cod of the Midwest. You can insert the laugh track after that in post-production, Jeff. But it's a big vacation area. It's a little peninsula that sticks out into Lake Michigan. And I guess Dak had an affinity for the area despite living in Minneapolis. I think he's originally from somewhere in Wisconsin, as I've gotten to know him a little bit better. But Sarah and I happened to be up there for a friend's 40th birthday party, and I was like, the only thing I want to do this weekend is check out Dak's property. So we hit it up on the way home and got to see his spot on the bluff overlooking Green Bay, the part of Lake Michigan between the Door Peninsula and the rest of Wisconsin, and get to see what he's hoping to build there.
It's a beautiful spot. It's an amazing building lot. Wow.
Yeah, he was working on clearing out some of the scrubby trees. He's got a lot of poplars that he was taking down, and some other oak trees that he was taking down and having milled up to use in parts of the project. But he had kind of sculpted a very nice woodsy scene with the lake behind it.
And is this gentleman in this photo Dak, I presume?
That is him. I made sure to get him in one for you, Patrick.
If podcast listeners want to meet Dak on our website, I hope you'll check it out. Well, that's awesome. Dak, keep us posted on how this goes. So thanks to all of you who have written in on the subject of EV charging. Once again, we got great listener emails. This one's from David. I'm ready to provide some input on home EV charging mentioned in podcast 597. I was actually reattaching some clapboards and painting my house when I heard Patrick's plea for help. For the first time, I actually have something to offer the show. Here's my short answer for those who want a little guidance but not all the details. Without a doubt, where and how I charge my EV is the main question I get about EV ownership. You don't get to go to the electric station like you go to the gas station with an internal combustion engine. When you buy an EV, I'd suggest, number one, at least get a mobile charger, more correctly described as a EVSE, electric vehicle supply equipment that plugs into a standard wall outlet. This will meet most Americans' need most of the times, which they're assuming to be about 40 miles per person per day. Number two, if you have a long commute, live in a rural area, or just nervous about the wall outlet giving you enough power, install an L2 charger, hardwire it, set it to charge at 40 amps or higher if your vehicle accepts higher amperages. You can keep your L1 charger in the car for the occasional road trip. If you have an electric truck, do more research on what power it can accept and consider buying a larger charger. One recommendation with the plug-in EVSE is to make sure you don't skimp on the outlet. As I understand it, you want the weakest part of your circuit to be the circuit breaker, but some in the owner forums are finding that their NEMA, N-E-M-A, 1450 outlets, a $40 difference in the outlet seems quite affordable when compared to being responsible for a thermal event in a client's home. Here are a few outlet options I pulled from Home Depot. So David sent us some products in the Home Depot website, and they range in price from $10 to $50. And of course, the $50 one is the one that folks in these EV owner forums suggest, because the other ones tend to melt. And it's not surprising, because a dryer doesn't run for 12 hours continuously like a car might be sucking juice, right? Another word of caution when using wall outlets or plug-in EVSEs are nuisance trips. I imagine a real electrician could explain it better, but many/all EVSEs have their own internal grounding and protection. So if you use them in combination with a GFCI or AFCI circuit, it can lead to nuisance trips where there isn't anything wrong with the breaker, but it trips it anyway. Advice I've seen is to use dumb breakers and allow the EVSE to manage its own protections. So do you have any of these problems with your Volt, Ian?
I do not, because it only charges at 16 amps.
It's just a normal
Yep.
outlet, right? Yeah.
No different than what I plugged the table saw into.
David, thanks for the great synopsis on how to go with the EV charging at home. I think that's fascinating. This comes from Doug. In the after discussion of Mike's Forever Home, he talked about the changing needs as we get older. When we were planning the home I ultimately built in Colorado, we read through a lot of books on aging in place and went to home shows several times. One idea we picked up at a home show from a remodeling contractor who specializes in accessibility was to raise the dishwasher a foot off the floor. I did this on our new home, and it makes loading and unloading much easier. Since I was building all our cabinets, it was no big deal, but with a little creativity, it can be done with stock cabinets too. The raised section of counter provided a perfect place to put our microwave at eye level. We have friends who really like this feature and asked for it when they were having a new home built. The architect said he had never heard of such a thing, so they are stuck bending over. It's impossible to think of everything, but we can try. Well, thanks, Doug. What a great idea, right?
My parents have had this in their house the whole time.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So whose idea was that, Ian?
They saw it in a home show. Same thing that Doug had. They saw it in a Parade of Homes house, and then they did the eye level microwave as well.
Smart.
I'm about to do it with our front loading washer and dryer. I'm gonna raise them up about a foot off the floor.
It's ridiculous how hard it is to get in and out of them when they're on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Jeff's nodding.
No, I did the same
They're
thing.
really low. Yeah, did you?
Yep.
Yeah. It seems like ideal storage under them too for like laundry stuff, right? Yeah. So you just gonna make a plywood box, or are you getting fancy, Brian?
No, I think I'm gonna make. I haven't designed it yet, but I think I'm gonna make essentially make a little plywood box with 2 drawers, for storage for that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously, it can't. I think it's got to be a bit stronger than a cabinet box. To have the washer and dryer on top of it vibrating if I want those drawers to work for very long. So I have to figure out how I'm going to handle that. It might need a 2x4 frame or something, but we'll see.
3/4 plywood is pretty strong, dude. Especially if you put a center divider in there, right?
How well does Advantech take stain?
That's going to be their next product. It's going to have
stain grade Advantech subfloor.
This comes from Paul. Afternoon, Patrick and crew. I was out in the shop denailing 70-year-old Douglas fir studs to mill into wood countertops to replace the awful laminate currently in place in my kitchen. So these are the people who listen to our podcast, which gives me great delight. I had the podcast on, which is usually the case when I'm doing boring menial work. When dowsing came up, I walked right out to write this email. In the inestimable Mike Gurton's testimony didn't sell you on the merits of dowsing. Let me offer this. I learned how to douse from a ranger at the scout camp at which I worked for many years. The ranger, Steve Yeager, if you're listening, used 2 L-shaped brass rods held loosely pointing forwards. When you went over a water line, they would swing to point in opposite directions parallel with the water line. He had another trick with a mayonnaise jar with a washer hanging from a string, and the washer would swing and tap the jar for how many feet down the line was. How a washer in a mayonnaise jar knows how to calibrate in feet instead of inches, I have no idea. Steve taught many of the youth working with him how to douse, which was useful since we were seemingly always tracking down broken underground water lines. The skill was teachable, but if you didn't have it, then you just didn't have it, and no amount of practice would help you find water. Interestingly, if someone who didn't have it tried dowsing while a dowser's hand was on their shoulder, it worked for them. But take the hand away, and that's it. For some people, when they cross a water line, the rods make an X, and then you have to find another spot and connect the dots. This seems to be the result of how it worked for the person who taught you. We later found we could find electrical lines, gas lines, anything linear was easy. We could even find people, though this was harder. Why does dowsing work? Haven't a clue, but it works, and it saved me from a lot of unnecessary digging over the years. Thanks for indulging this trip down memory lane. Great work on the pod, as always, Paul. So the dowsing method Paul describes is how Carol knows how to do it too. Ian, did you inherit this skill from your dad?
I learned at a very early age that I am not wired for belief in the metaphysical.
So how could you deny, though, when your dad found whatever it is he was looking for, that it didn't work?
My father is also hardwired to not believe in the metaphysical.
So he doesn't believe in this either.
Correct.
Okay. What do you think, Brian?
Although I'm interested in having Paul put his hand on me while I try and use him and see if I suddenly have the energy.
What do you think, Brian?
I have no idea. I've never seen it done. I've heard over and over and over about it over the years. It's story after story, but I've never seen it myself. So I don't know.
You know, very smart people who are, scientific minded have told me that it works. I'm very skeptical. Our first question comes from Michael. Hi, Patrick. I'm teaching a course at UMass Amherst in Building Construction Technology Program, BCT 220, Communicating Building Science and Sustainability. The course is dedicated to expressing the sometimes complex building science / sustainability topics that we have to explain to stakeholders and customers. Could you and/or the FHB crew provide any pointers or tips to the class for communicating well with stakeholders and customers? I like what Ian said a few weeks ago when he stated something to the effect of our customers not being professional customers, which clearly shows the importance of explaining options and potential investments. Specifically, one, can you share a case study where there was a communication breakdown and what could have been done to prevent it? Two, when did you experience exemplary communication with a customer / stakeholder, and how can we replicate it? Three, are there any job site specific communication issues our students should prepare for, good or bad? Thanks for all that you and FHB crew do. The magazine and the Taunton Press in general are constant sources of reference for the class. Also, I'm offering extra credit to any of the students who go to Touch a Trade in October and create a document that includes a key image and description of what they experience. My daughters and I will see you at Touch a Trade in October as well. Thanks in advance. Respectfully, Mike. Mike, honestly, this touched me. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at Touch a Trade. Take it away, Ian. What do you think?
Empathy and patience. Those are the two most important things, because you're focusing on communication. You're not necessarily focusing on the skill or the detail. You have to develop that connection with I think you put it as stakeholders or customers. I think a stakeholder could be an architect or an engineer who may have some beliefs and may not be really
code enforcement, right?
Accustomed to thinking that they're wrong or being told that they're wrong by a tradesperson. But I think empathy and patience has got to be your starting point for communicating to people in general.
What about when things have gone horribly wrong? Can you think of a brief example?
I can think of a lot of examples. I can't really think of one around high performance details, but just from scheduling perspectives, if you don't keep people abreast of the schedule and the schedule changes, they can still have expectations for project completion that don't necessarily line up with what's really going to happen. So I think it's a grind of constant communication between you and your client.
Schedule.
Yeah, I think with scheduling, people can lose sight of changes that they've made and things that maybe didn't go well, rain delays, other delays, and they can have the same expectation for completion date that you gave them originally. So you do have to keep people constantly informed and understanding, when the end game changes when it comes to schedule, the way finishes can turn out. One in particular that I remember from a job I did with Mason was there was a client that had a very specific desired paint sheen finish, and it was something that they had used previously, and it was very difficult to get them to understand that the chemical makeup of that same paint had changed. And I believe we actually had to get an engineer from Benjamin Moore to come in and explain why the sheen of the same type of paint that they had maybe used 10 years ago, despite being from the same line, now did not quite have the depth of color with the shine that they were accustomed to. So I think it's just being empathetic to what your client is trying to achieve.
I would offer that when things are changed or go wrong, letting people know as soon as possible is always a good idea. If you think things are going to fix themselves on their own, I would tell you they don't.
Yeah.
I gotten with this job, I've gotten to visit so many excellent houses over the years, and I've always been impressed when I talked to the homeowners about how much they knew about their house, and how they could tell me about their house in almost the same way the builder or the architect could. And so obviously it's going to take empathy and patience, like Ian suggested, but just putting the time into educating your clients. I think the more people know, the more, in my experience anyway, often the more people know, the more curious they get. So starting to share things with them early on is probably going to pique their curiosity. And so, yeah, homeowner education. And then another thing that I heard about over and over and over again on these types of projects were the pre-construction meetings, getting all trades, everyone who's going to work on the house together before anyone does anything, and just explaining some, I hate to call them rules, because you probably don't want to use language like rules with anyone who's maybe skeptical of what you might be doing, but just sort of explaining some simple things, like if you're building a high performance home, you explain where the air barrier is and how penetrations are going to need to be handled through it, and so that everyone on a specific project is on the same page from very early on. And then I think another thing that I've learned, or to at least summarize another thing I've learned from so many architects and builders who are successful with high performance homes, is to really help the stakeholders understand the benefit for them. So like when you're training a framer on how to frame a house that needs to meet an extreme level of air sealing, for example, like now this is something that they can bring to other work, right? You're helping them improve their skills. They can bring this to other builders or architects that they work for, so helping the stakeholders to see the benefit for them. And it can go so far as a financial benefit. Fernando Ruiz, who has written for Fine Homebuilding forever and has built and developed in all different capacities, he had a program, and I don't know if I'll remember it exactly right, but he had a program where, when he was building lots of houses, where if one of his subs brought a money-saving idea to him, he split the savings with the sub, and then sent them sort of royalties every time he used that idea. He sent him some money and paid him for the idea. So he actually gave him a financial incentive to be part of problem solving.
You said it in several capacities, Brian, but I was at a webinar and it was described as building your team. And I think that's a way to summarize it quite eloquently, because everyone on a team benefits when you win, and everyone suffers when it doesn't work. So I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
I believe it was Emily Mottram who first kind of clued me into that concept. What about when things work really well? Why, and how do you do it again? I don't know. When it works well, do you notice?
A lot of times, no.
Yeah.
But I think to go on what Brian said about the development of teams, it's also giving all the members of the team something that they can own, a piece of it that is theirs, that they can be intimately involved with, whether it's somebody managing the air seal, the air barrier, watching over all of your additional trades. Maybe it's somebody who really takes control of flashing and insulating the windows, building the window bucks. It's giving people something that they can own.
And
and I
take
wonder if
responsibility for it, right? If something goes
Yeah.
wrong, they'll fix
Yeah,
it.
and maybe even, and this is just coming to mind right now, but maybe even sort of sharing in the achievement. In other words, if you just have someone come in and do work on a project and then send them off and they never hear about the project again, they may not know how successful that project was. So if it were like that, if it were that you had a framer who it was the first time that they were helping with a house that needed to be very airtight, maybe you invite them for the blower door test, that kind of thing, like so that they see the results.
And as far as things students should prepare for, be prepared for these types of projects to require almost constant management. And that's something that's oftentimes overlooked or forgotten, both in budgets for projects and in time. The management of a project and management of the stakeholders and clients eat away at someone's time.
Good conversation. If y'all have thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you listening. This comes from Dan. Hi, FHB podcast. Do any of you know any durable and decent looking cover systems for exterior foundation insulation? This is a recurring question in my life over the 2 decades I've been in construction media. I don't know that anyone has found a good answer to this problem. He goes on to say, I'm building a small wood frame structure on a concrete foundation in Massachusetts where the new energy code with local amendments require either very thick walls or continuous insulation. We're choosing continuous exterior wall insulation and to avoid very thick walls. To ensure the foundation insulation is continuous with the wall exterior insulation, we will avoid thermal breaks, and we will also apply rigid insulation to the exterior side of the foundation. So we will at least meet code insulation values and probably exceed them. The problem we're facing is how to cover the exposed foundation insulation. Do you all have any experience with materials to do this? Yes, appearance matters, but durability is key, as the foundation is next to rental apartments and will likely be very close to high traffic pedestrian walkways and subject to abuse, such as snow removal, deliveries, and movers. I'm a longtime listener that always appreciates the wide-ranging subject matter, enjoyment of building topics, culture of learning, and sometimes ridiculous comedy on the show. Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Dan. You guys have an answer to this?
Groundbreaker foundation liner, which is an
Holy crap,
FRP
okay.
panel that is it's gray in color like a concrete foundation, comes in I think 12, 24, and 48 by 50 rolls, and it can be put on prior to backfill to cover up the insulation. Also
And how do
works
you
as a
adhere
good
it,
pest
Ian?
barrier. The way we've done it in the past is to actually do it so that you're attaching it to the sheathing. So you're running it up behind the first course of siding and then down into the dirt backfilled around the foundation.
Okay. Brian, do you buy this?
Well, I've seen successful applications of cement board in a parge coat, and I personally think that looks really nice. And I mean, often when you don't have exterior foundation, you're just looking at foundation wall anyway for those 6 inches. So it doesn't look all that much different than that. I mean, there's some. I feel like every time I see it mentioned on on one of like on Green Building Advisor, for example, people always sort of this caveat in there about durability. But I know builders, some really great builders who do that as a matter of course. It's just their regular finish. So I wouldn't have any durability concerns with it. You can do cultured stone veneer. In a similar way. Metal flashing is common.
Yeah, pre-bent coil stock, right? Or bent coil stock. It's pre-finished.
Yeah, and I imagine that I imagine that you could find a way to do that where it could be easily maintained and fixed if needed to. I've never done it. And then there's another product called Foundation Pro, and it's actually it's a system, but it is the rigid foam insulation, but it has a vinyl coating on it, and I believe it comes with a flashing at the top, of like a flashing channel at the top and the bottom of the exposed piece. So you can look at Foundation Pro, and then I we had a really excellent article on Green Building Advisor a few years ago about insulating slab foundations for to stop thermal bridging. And so this wasn't what the article was about, but as sort of a sidebar at the end of the article, the author shared he asked the same question sort of rhetorically. He said, everyone's trying to figure this out, and he shared that he just uses a EPDM membrane, and he just has 6 inches or 8 inches of this black between the house and the grade, and he feels like it's durable, easy to apply, and just sort of disappears.
Wow, that is the gutsiest solution I've ever heard. I
If you
would
look,
just worry about a weed whacker with that, but as long as you're careful.
yeah, there's photos of it if anyone wants to check it out. I think if you search insulating slab foundation, exterior slab insulation, maybe on GBA, you'll find that article. And it's an excellent article. Even before you get to that, just they did all this modeling, and they have these great images of how heat transfers from inside the building out through that slab edge.
It's a surprising amount, right? That's a
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah, and how
bridge.
how specific you get with your insulation really makes a big difference. Yeah.
If any of you listening have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. Like I said, it's been something that's been talked about in the construction media world for a long time. Justin writes in, "Hey, FHB podcast crew, I love the show and the nerdy details. I'm a project manager and owner's rep for new builds and rehabs for a small affordable housing nonprofit in Minnesota, climate zone 6 and soon to be 5 with as our climate warms. Anyways, I'm curious to know your take on how you suggest handling HVAC load calcs and manual J calculations. I require Energy Star on some of my projects, which also requires manual J calculations. Very few HVAC contractors know how to do these calculations, and they usually are provided at the end of the project, which defeats the purpose, right? So the system that was installed does not reflect the manual J heating and cooling loads that were calculated. It's very frustrating. Even on simple new builds, I'll compare the HVAC contractor supplied heat loads and heat gains to the system they provide or the equipment rather, and compare that to the energy rater provided calculations. Here's an example for a recent project. So the HVAC provided heat load calculation was 42,000 BTUs per hour. The cooling load was 19,000 BTUs per hour. The energy rater provided a 20,000 BTU heating load and 8,000 BTU cooling. So the equipment that was installed was a 60,000 BTU furnace, which is now 3 times what the energy rater specified. And the AC unit is a 2-ton, which I believe a ton is 18,000 BTUs. So it is 36,000 BTUs of cooling, versus what was required was 8. Notice how the cooling loads were differentiated by orientation. This was a twin home with a majority of windows facing either north or south. Okay, yeah. How do you find a competent HVAC contractor? These examples were experienced in working with our markets, and they're the 2 largest companies. Thank you, and keep up the good work, Justin. What do you guys think? We hear this over and over again, right? That the loads are fudged and the equipment they installed doesn't even pay attention to the fudged loads.
I think that Patrick, I think a ton, just before I go on, I think a ton is 12,000.
Okay, thank you.
Not 18,000. Yeah. That seemed a little high to me. I'd have to look that up. I'm pretty sure it's 12,000. Maybe we could clarify that. It's a great question, and definitely some. I feel like always some energy modeling should be done. If it's and the simplest I think is a manual J. The first thing that came to my mind when I asked this question was if I mean, if he had modeling done by an energy rater and modeling done by an HVAC contractor, and then something completely else got installed bigger than both of the estimates, I wonder what went wrong there. That's sort of separate from his question, which I think is like, just sort of, is it needed? Should it be done? And how should it be done? And if your HVAC contractor won't do it, I think you find another HVAC contractor, or you provide them with a
plan.
a plan and have them follow through with it. Because you can have, like, I had the manual J done on the house that I built last year. I had it done not by the HVAC contractor. I had it done by someone else, someone who's independent. It's so you can have it done. You can have a separate company do it and then provide it to the HVAC contractor and sort of work with them to make sure that the right equipment is installed and the right if you follow through with what are the other two, manual S and manual D, and have design, you can even make sure that they follow through with that sizing and design. I think it's important to note that, like, the models are only as good as the inputs and then the execution of the building, right? So you have to have really good inputs about what you're planning on building in terms of, like, what are the R values and the U factors and the air tightness and orientation of the house, local weather conditions. You have to know all of that stuff to get a good model done. And then you have to build the house that you modeled for, right? So, if you say you're going to hit, 2 ACH 50 and your equipment is sized on that, you have to hit 2 ACH 50 and verify that. So that's an important piece of the puzzle too. It could be, otherwise it's just not all that different than rule of thumb sizing, right? Because it's sort of, you're guessing one way or another.
You are right, Brian. A ton of cooling is 12,000 BTUs. So there you go. So, and the reason I can tell you for the AC system being upsized is you just can't get small equipment. Like the smallest A-coil I've ever seen is 1.5 tons. You're nodding, Ian, right? Like smaller doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes it doesn't. But I think we have to, in some ways, this is probably going to be a little bit unpopular, but I think we have to cut the HVAC contractors some slack. You're asking them to do something that may be far outside of their abilities. And I would say, think of it in terms of, there are a handful of carpenters out there who can probably size a beam by just looking at what they needed to carry and going to the lumberyard and buying it. But the vast majority of us, we need someone to tell us what to put there. And I think we need to start approaching HVAC contractors the way that we approach some structural engineering and accept the fact that we're going to need an outside professional to tell our technical professional on site what to do. And then it's on you as a project manager or an architect or whoever is leading the build to make sure that that equipment is installed and is installed the way that your engineer intended for it.
More like the commercial or institutional world, right, Ian? Like,
Yep.
The installer at a hospital is not picking the equipment or designing the system, and it's probably beyond the capability with the technology and the complexity of homes now for an average HVAC tech.
Yeah. And then, like you just alluded to, Ian and Patrick, you say often, then make sure it's working well before the job is done.
Yep.
Commission the equipment.
I went to Chris Hughes, who, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, Ian, because I think Chris Hughes from TEC, who's working with us on an HVAC commissioning story, as Brian just alluded to, had some thoughts on this, and I'm going to read what he wrote. He says, Patrick, I wish there was a simple answer to this one, but unfortunately there is not. I would say spend some time vetting an HVAC contractor that you can depend on every build. He says that as far as the design process, first is the manual J. You have to have one. Make sure that their items like solar heat gain coefficients and U values are correct in the manual J calculation, along with the R values of the structure. This should be handed over in a detailed report from the manual J producer. Everyone today does this with software, so this is not a big ask. It's important to notice what the designer has used for internal gains, people, appliances, loads, etc. In residential, the standard practice is total up the bedrooms and add one extra person. Second is the manual S. This selects the equipment. All the equipment is not created equal, so one brand may have a nominal 3-ton that produces 34,000 BTUs an hour, while another might be only 31,000 BTUs per hour. Some of the load calculation software will have an option to auto-select equipment that matches the manual J, while some software programs do not, which requires the designer to look up the expanded performance data of the equipment. Third's the manual D. This is the process of designing the ductwork based on the manual J and S. This is often the step that gets the least attention to detail, but will make a very large impact on how the system performs. Fourth is manual T, which is the process of selecting grills and diffusers, and it's also important for mixing of the air in the space. To find an adequate HVAC contractor, I would have a lengthy discussion about the manual process and see if the contractor has a high level of competence in the topic. Secondly, I would ask for 2 examples completed by the company and if they could speak to their clients about their experience. I'd recommend using one of the top companies for completing a load calculation: Quick Model, 3D RightSoft, and Elite. These 3 programs are ACCA approved, meaning they have had to go through a vetting process to be accredited. There are some other programs, but none that I have much experience with to give good advice on. It would be in anyone's best interest to get formal training in one of these programs to be able to complete their own design. RightSoft has meanhvac.com. I'll put these links on the website, and these are places where you can learn these programs. Alex Meany is the trainer and very experienced. meanhvac.com. Quick Model 3D. Russ King, company owner, posts free training sessions on YouTube. And Elite is affiliated with the National Comfort Institute, and they have an HVAC training organization that trains techs in the field, and I believe they're launching a new class that teaches Elite software in the fall. Finally, it cannot be stressed enough that no matter who performs the manual JDST process, that someone in the end must commission the job, meaning that a checkout process is followed. Attached is a link to a video that was hosted by the ACCA that describes the standard 310 residential commissioning process. It's a great process that should be the minimum of work done at the end of every install to make sure the design is working correctly. Second, it's very important that the builder have an air tightness number that the company expects to meet. This number should be relayed to the HVAC designer for the manual J portion of the design. The Energy Conservatory has a website with a great deal of air tightness training as well as HVAC training. I've added the link below to their training page. Oh my gosh, Chris, thank you so much. And I look forward to working with you on your feature article. Also very, very important and cool piece we're working on right now. What do you guys think? Is that summing up too much?
I think that sums up how complex it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, that's one of those things that's kind of like black magic to me. I don't know.
It's like
it
dowsing.
Didn't used to be, and we're still dealing with it because, every house used to be the same, and they had the same kind of glazed windows, and then there got to be 2 kinds of glass, right? But now there's so many options, and the complexity is so far beyond what we started with. So I got to ask you, Brian, did your HVAC contractor put more heating and cooling than was specified in your design? Yes.
Yes, but in an interesting way. So we needed I don't remember the numbers. I think it was 16 and change for heating, a little less for cooling, if I'm remembering right. And so I had thought about just putting in one mini split head in our living area, and although I was that's what I was thinking about, and I was definitely wanting to talk to the HVAC contractor about that idea. And then because as listeners probably have heard us say before, like the way ductless mini splits particularly work is that a 1-to-1 setup of the compressor and head is the most, it's going to operate the most efficiently. That's a very efficient setup. So that's what I was thinking about. So the HVAC contractor came in, and HVAC contractor, by the way, is not the right term for who did my install, because my plumber actually installed these, and he's a plumber, but he also does ductless mini splits. He's been doing them for a very long time. It's something that he added to his work at some point. And I have a good relationship with him as a plumber, so I trusted him to do this. So he came in and he basically said, the only callbacks I get about these mini splits is distribution. We put them in and the comfort levels just aren't the same throughout the space that that we're trying to heat or cool. And so he said, I suggest that you put one where you were planning on it one head where you're planning on it in the living area and one in each bedroom. And so that's what we did. And it's a little bit oversized, but we can use them selectively. And he made a good call. Most of the time we only run the one in the living area, which I want to say has the 9,000 BTUs around 9,000 BTUs of heating. And most of the time through last winter, that's all we used. Once in a while on the coldest, in the coldest parts of the winter, we turned on the one in the bedroom when we went to sleep. Usually had to get up at night and turn it off at some point. And then in the summer, it's been nice to have the cooling just in the bedroom because we can not have it run all day. And then if it was a really hot night and we want to just kind of take the edge off the bedroom, we can just fire it up for a little while. Most of the time this summer we used the system for dehumidification, not actually for cooling. So we did end up oversized altogether. You add the three heads together and we have, I guess like around 27,000 BTUs instead of 16. But I think it's working well. It's not as efficient as I described the 1-to-1 setup because it's three heads on, one outdoor unit, but I think it's working well.
Ian, how do you handle the design process at your company?
So for the new house that we're building, we actually believe we used Mark Rosenbaum as the engineer for it. And then we worked with someone from Zender for the ERV portion of it. But it was a fully engineered system, which then got turned over to a local HVAC contractor who is going to execute it to the engineer drawings. But in my personal house, it's the same exact layout that Brian just described, except I think we have an 18,000 BTU head in our main living space, which is the whole first floor.
I'm sure your subs are familiar with your company and the good work you do, Ian, but do you get pushback from your HVAC contractor? He's like, this is not enough heating or cooling. I hear often subcontractors respond to, what they feel as overly conservative load calculations.
The particular contractor that we're using for the house didn't give us any pushback. I think he believed in the engineering and probably looked at it as absolving him of blame if it turned out not to be enough. Other HVAC contractors that we've worked with, we have received pushback or not a clear understanding of what we were trying to accomplish with the low load aspect to a project.
Well, once again, I'm always delighted with the letters and questions folks write into the podcast. It really makes it what it is. So thank you very much for that. Good subjects today, right? Good feedback. Good show. So any of you who are Fine Homebuilding All Access members, I hope you'll stay tuned for the after show where we're going to talk about developing budgets for building projects. And if you're not an All Access member, I hope you'll consider it. It helps us continue the important work of Fine Homebuilding and have these great conversations, right? Any parting words, fellows, before we move into the after show?
Well, my parting thoughts are that it's a real bummer to have the rainiest day of the year on the first day that my PV system is working. It was really anticlimactic to turn the switch, to turn the shut off on, to turn the system on the rainiest day of the year.
Do you have some way to monitor what energy you're producing? I bet you do.
I do, and I look forward to sharing that as I get a few months of usage data.
I'm surprised you don't have it on your desk right now and you're keeping track of...
I have it open, Patrick, and I'm waiting for the website to catch up. It still says your system is currently under construction. I keep hitting the refresh button, but I guess it's going to take a couple of days.
Well, thank you all very much for listening. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ian, Brian, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for being here. Please remember to send us your questions, suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Stay tuned for the after show.